Hi, Jennie. Um, so we are classmates at Salem State University, learning to be librarians, and we are recording our review of the book, The Threads That Bind. Um, there it is, by
Kika Hatzopoulou.
yeah,
Hatzopoulou.
Kika Hatzopoulou. Yeah, Hatzopoulou. Anyway, um, yeah, we
So,
enjoyed it. So we were gonna like go through sort of the synopsis, the world building, what we liked, what we didn't like, and sort of who we thought might enjoy the book.
so for a quick overview of what this book is about, it centers on a girl named Io, and she is one of three sisters. She is descended from the Fates, which are famous in Greek mythology. And she lives in this post-apocalyptic world. There's been this huge environmental disaster. Half the city is underwater. Um, and there are sort of two classes of people. There are the normal humans, and then there are the otherborn, who are descended from various gods and goddesses from different mythology, but mostly Greek is the focus of this book. So Io is a private investigator, and she gets caught up in this mystery that begins when these raids, these half dead, half alive creatures start killing people in her neighborhood at random. And it doesn't connect at first, but the deeper she gets into this mystery, the more she has to deal with mob bosses and political groups and all of these things that wind together. And then there's a little bit of romance in there as well.
Yeah. The sort of like magical conceit of the world is that the descendants of the gods have these powers that are connected to whoever they're descended from. So her and her two sisters are, as Jennie said, descended from the Fates. So they can sort of pull up this other view of the world and see the fate threads that connect people together. So they're well, they're not all fate threads, but they're threads of connection and love and loyalty. So you might have a thread to your family member. You might also have a thread to like your favorite shirt or something like that. They're all different kinds of meaningful connections that are like part of your psyche. So Io's like special power is she can cut them, whereas her older sister can um, like stretch them or mold them, and her other sister can create them. And other descendants have different powers. So one of her friends can um, pluck strings and play music and put people to sleep, or um, you know, some fate, like some otherborn have the power of playing on people's fears or being able to see other aspects of the world. Um, so that's sort of like the magical conceit. And the world itself, like you said, is sort of post-apocalyptic. It's in this the city that is half flooded, and that the tides like will really affect the city. So it's like they have like flood blind.
But
I'm going off on a tangent, but like blands and blinds, excuse me. The like the whole city will be underwater at points. Um, yeah.
there's kind of like there's two different levels of the city too. There's some of it that's underwater, like you were saying, and it's sort of like the slums, and that's where a lot of the
Yeah.
story takes place. And there's a mob, and there's all sorts of kind of gangsters that are trying to control the turf. And then there's the nice part of the city where a lot of the powerful political groups are. And the more that Io tries to solve the mystery in the Silts, which is that like slum part of the city, the more and more she's finding out that people from the more powerful part of the city are involved in this as well. So it's definitely mysterious. Um, and then the other aspect of the story that I think, both found interesting was the inclusion of the fate thread, the connection
Yes.
Io has to, she's able to see her connection to her deepest love or deepest connection. And like at first we don't know if it's like a friendship or whatever it could be, but we find out pretty early on that she's connected to this guy, and he's destined to be really important to her in some ways. So from pretty early on in the book, we're supposed to follow along as she figures out what she wants to do in terms of this thread. Does she pursue him? Does she tell him? Does she not? And that's a conflict she has to deal with herself.
Yeah, because the threads, they're sort of made through your actions, so it's unusual to have this fate thread that is sort of predetermined, and it's really interesting to see her wrestle with, like, is it unethical to not tell him? Should she cut it because she's able to do that? That sort of thing. So it's a real conundrum. And yeah,
there's also a sibling dynamic too.
Yeah,
which gets intense.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things, was the dynamic between the three sisters, and Io really working through like some more complicated feelings about these people that she loves. And her older sister starts the book having left. She's gone after raising Io and her other sister pretty much since she was a teenager, since Io was little. And Thais, is that how you say her name? I'm not actually sure. I think so, Thais. That's why I said it. She's has very clear ideas about what she thinks is right and what she thinks is wrong. And she loves her sisters, but she can also be really manipulative and hurtful, and puts a lot of shame on Io. So throughout the book, we see Io really like coming into her own, trying to sort out what are her own feelings, what are her own values, and what are the ones that have been sort of instilled in her by her relationship with her sister. And I'd say that's really the central relationship dynamic.
Yeah, it comes up in ways that we're not going to expect, like when you start the book. So if you like twists and turns, you might really enjoy this book, or like an unexpected plot twist.
Yeah. One of the things that I liked was, I'm queer, and so LGBT representation is really important to me. And I thought that this book did it beautifully. Io is straight, so it's not like a central thing. But a lot of the secondary characters are queer. Her sister is, and it's just done in a way that is very beautifully part of the world. There's like, I noticed there was like one sentence that made me think that Io's best friend was trans, and it was just very matter of fact. There are characters that use they them pronouns, and it's not a big deal. And it's also not a big deal, I feel like, sometimes with YA. I think it's easier in a fantasy world to do this, but sometimes in YA, it's not a big deal, like so hard that it then feels like a big deal. Like, it's like, we're doing representation, we're really doing it. And this just felt very natural and very part of the characters and who they were and this like vibrant world.
Yeah, and it wasn't sort of the stereotypical coming out story that we've seen a lot of in YA. Like you were saying, the characters exist and it's part of who they are, and it's part of the story, it's part of the world of the story, and it is considered normal and it's accepted, and that's a really cool thing to see. Something that I personally did not love was how quickly we were introduced to all the different elements of the world. Like, we have the mythology, we have the mob, we have the politics, and it's all very interesting and it makes for a great mystery. But I felt like we could have used a little bit more time to process how everything was connected and get some more background information, because there were parts where it felt a little clunky, like, oh, I have to introduce this now or else this later plot point's not going to make sense. So I would have liked to see a little bit more time spent on that, but there is also a sequel. So maybe some of those details we didn't get in this one will get more fleshed out in the sequel.
Yeah, and we've been talking before about how the ending felt pretty abrupt. And I think the sequel will hopefully help that feel a little bit less jarring as well. Because it did sort of feel like things sort of reached ahead and then were wrapped up kind of quickly with still a lot of questions that I had anyway.
With the romance, like we don't get a definitive. Are they together? Are they not? We know that they admitted that they like each other, but we want more.
We want more. In terms of like where it fits into like a library, for example, I would say I would probably classify it as fantasy. But it definitely has elements of mystery, of post-apocalyptic settings. You had mentioned that people who like steampunk would really resonate with it, which I strongly agree with.
I think the vibe of the world, like Mortal Engines type, it's this new society. There's been an environmental disaster. There's a new system at play. And we've talked about like Percy Jackson too. Like this, it definitely takes the idea of descending from the gods and then not just it up a level, because it's not just, Poseidon, Zeus, Hades, not like the typical pantheon. We get a lot of minor gods and goddesses whose powers are actually pretty scary if they're used to the extent that some of these characters use them. So if you're a fan of Percy Jackson and you're looking for something a little bit more, you might really like this book.
Yeah. I also did really like that one of the characters or a couple of characters are from like a totally different part of the world. And so they're coming in, it was just sort of an aside, but like a pantheon that wasn't Greek. And they were sort of like, okay, well, like this god is like basically the same power over here, which I thought was a interesting way to like think about mythology and all these different cultures having sort of like complementary but different histories and lineages.
Yeah, I think there was Egyptian, maybe there was Norse.
I think there was Norse. Yeah.
What would you say your overall rating, or do you have any more critiques before we get into the readings?
No, I think that about covers it. Overall, I really enjoyed it. And I would give it 4 out of 5 threads.
I would give it 4 out of 5 threads as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. It was a really, and I think the thread metaphor really was apt. I think there were a lot of different pieces and it was a very like tightly woven tapestry.
Awesome. All right. Well, we hope everyone enjoyed this little review, and you should definitely consider picking this up or listening to it. It's on Libby as a ebook and an audiobook. So if you're not a copy person, there are other options as well.
Yeah. I'd love to know what you think. Bye, Jenny. Thank you.